welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast, your guide to help you manage life, money, and multiples. Each episode, host Paul Fenner, Tama Capital's president and founder, and the proud parent of 4 amazing children, including 1 set of triplets, will provide insights on successfully sustaining an active lifestyle, career, and family through comprehensive wealth management strategies, financial education, and lifestyle planning, specific to parents raising twins, triplets, and more. Learn more, subscribe to the show, or connect with Paul at tamacapital.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of TAMA may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What if you woke up and suddenly realized you had more time? Not just hours, days, or weeks, but decades. Avivah Wittenberg-Cox thinks about time in not only decades, but in 25-year increments. As someone who thought in her 30s she would be retired at age 60, she now finds herself starting anew again, refreshed by the ability to start something new because she may only be at the halfway point of her life. With this point of view, Avivah wrote a Harvard Business Review article that instead of focusing on the challenges and stresses of being a working parent, she instead focused on the joy, knowing that this would be one of many life transitions. There were 4 areas that Avivah, looking back now, wished were easier to remember while she was in the thick of raising her family. One of the most important was loving your spouse or partner and not demoting your relationship to the bottom of the pile. According to Avivah, longevity means that more than ever, we need to plan for change. Using the gift of decades requires acknowledging their existence and deciding what you want to do with them. People say you can't have it all, but the gift of time gives us new options to have a lot more than we ever thought possible. Please enjoy my conversation with Avivah Wittenberg-Cox. So, Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.
Thank you, Paul. Lovely to be here with you.
And before we hit record, we were having this conversation off air about how to pronounce your name because I just wanted to make sure it's not a name that you typically come across here stateside. So, but I came across how we were introduced, or I was introduced to your work, was through a Harvard Business School article, which was titled "What I Learned About Working Parenthood After My Kids Grew Up." And I will tell you, and I will read this verbatim for our audience. The first line is what grabbed my attention. So most people know that I have a set of soon-to-be 12-year-old triplets and a 10-year-old. And the first sentence of your article was, "There are so many articles about the challenges and stresses of being a working parent, but this is an article about joy." It's like you had me at hello, Avivah. So why don't we start with giving our audience a little bit of background about who you are and exactly how you came to write this Harvard Business article.
Who I am is always a complicated question because we can't carry so many hats, right? So I am a Canadian-born, French, Swiss, Canadian citizen who's lived most of my adulthood in Europe, but I grew up in Canada. And I've worked for the last 25 years on issues of gender balance in the business world all over the world. So I've been in over 40 countries working with leaders, mostly men actually, on issues of how do you gender balance and nationality balance large organizations. And so the issues, of course, of personal life and work-family balance are intrinsic to the topic. And I've seen it through many, many lenses. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm currently, as I mentioned to you as we opened, I'm currently at Harvard doing the unusual thing at 60 of going back to school. So I spent a year in the Advanced Leadership Initiative, which is a program designed for older people who want to transition into purposeful third quarters.
Well, and that's going to be a topic that I want to focus on too, is the work that you do on transitions. And now that we're living older, I don't think many of our mindsets have changed. I think in one of the articles you put, like, I think these were your words. It's like, when I was in my 30s, I thought I'd be retired at 60. And now here I am at 60 and just getting going again. So I think I'm really looking, I've been really looking for this conversation. So how did the Harvard Business article come about? I think you kind of just alluded to the fact that you work with, a lot of bigger companies, and you were raising your own kids at the same time. But walk us through, like, how did that framework of that article come about?
Well, and I've been a coach for 20 years, right? So I've worked with a lot of, especially executive women, but leaders of all kinds, working their way through trying to conciliate a fairly impossible equation, right? How do you balance work and family in a time where we know work is 24/7, increasingly stressful, very gig? The pandemic has shifted our attitudes to work to some extent, but it's a non-obvious topic. And so I've been on all of these issues of how do you pace careers, how do you balance, how do you have a life, how do you survive and thrive, hopefully, in both your personal and professional lives for decades. And so I've been charting my own, you always chart your own experience with what you learn from everybody else's. And I was just really struck when I entered what I call third quarter, which is kind of post 50, how unexpectedly delicious it was. And nobody told me this was coming, And so we have this rather youth-oriented, ageist culture that actually has this hidden secret that these may be the best decades of your life. And I think it's underwritten, undersold, and undershared. So I thought it was time to try. And it may also be, of course, a new thing, right? We are now aging in a way that's quite different from the way our parents and grandparents did. We've been gifted an extra 30 years of life by science in just one century. So we are actually not only living longer, stretching towards these 80, 90, 100-year-old lives, but we're also beginning to understand how to live much healthier, which means that when you're turning 50, in my current calculations, you're only halfway through. And that means, oh my God, you wake up suddenly as your children are just sort of going out the door, that you're empty nest and you're looking around and suddenly you don't have quite as much to do. In fact, you have this gaping hole of time that you also weren't expecting. And you have as much time in front of you as you do behind. And most 50-year-olds kind of feel old, right? They feel like, oh my God, I can be slowing down and I'm empty nest and I'm post this and it'll be retirement next. And I think that's all wrong. I think we are only just beginning now at 50 to become who we really are, post some of our very important roles, which are creating families and parenting kids. But the joy, and so the joy is in discovering this. My goodness, you kind of have a second youth with the additional benefit of the love and delight of these charming humans, if you've been lucky enough to have them turn out reasonably well, who are in your life and supportive champions and admirers of what you do next.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, which is just fascinating, because just this morning when my wife Teresa and I were getting ready to start our day, she made some comment about being old. And I'm like, I'm not old. We're not old. And so I turned 46 this year. She turned 48. And it was a perfect setup. And she didn't even know I was talking to you today about this topic. But I think she's going to find it extremely interesting, because when I was reading your article, I think what the angle that I took was, okay, I'm a parent today, but it was, when I was reading the article, like unpacking a unwrapped present, if you will, because I could see oh my gosh, like after my kids get through high school or college, it's going to be another life transition. And I think that's one of the things that we really highlighted on this show over the last 2+ years now of having it, is that life is all about transitions and the unexpected and the expected, but they occur, I think, without us necessarily knowing about them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So you're what, 47, and your triplets.
I'll be 47 in May of 23, and my triplets are about to turn 12 in 2 more weeks, and my plus one Mackenzie turned 10 a month ago.
I'm just, you map it out. I always make people draw this and write down, their lifelines from 0 to 100 and what the big things are. So, if you just add your kids are 12, 18, they often leave for college, right? Which gives you 6 years. Well, 46 plus 6 gives you 52. So when you're 52, this massive tsunami that completely changed your life and your existence is going to be traipsing probably fairly contentedly out the door without even really looking back over their shoulders. And yeah, you'll have to be at the end of a phone call, but it is such an unexpected shift in just the volume of time, work, and energy that you have to devote every single day to their charms, right? And so the joy of both being a parent is, one, to realize that the stress and inevitable struggles of being a hands-on working parent are really high, but it's short. And that's what we don't realize, that in just a few short years, it's all going to be in the rear view mirror. And then what do you want to do? And I think it's incredibly hard to imagine your own future self. It's almost impossible, right?
Yes.
We're really bad at this. And so I always invite people to really think at your age, rather than thinking like your wife and like almost everybody that, you're getting a bit on and your kids are moving on. You are gently ending your first half. What are you going to do with the second half?
Yeah. And that's an interesting point, because I feel like I've been having this conversation with the families that I work with really more in depth the last several years, because even somebody that says, okay, Paul, I really hate my job, I got to find a way out of here. I'm like, okay, well, let's take a deep breath. But what would you do? Like if you had all the money in the world and didn't have to work, what would you do? Like, I know you as a person, you have this, you've spent your heart and soul into this career, and it's not where you want it to be right now. So what else do you want to think about doing? Because just sitting at home, or if you have hobbies, if you're even lucky enough to develop a hobbies, like during this time when you have kids and work and whatnot, most people don't. It's very challenging. And a lot of people are, I think, afraid to stop and give themselves permission to give themselves that gift of time to say, okay, wow, Paul's making a good point, or Avivah's making a good point. What do I really want to do? I think that scares people. People don't want to.
I think, we underestimate how ageist we are against our future selves and against old people in general, including us in a few years. And that the whole economic model in which we live is geared to yesterday's 3 phases of life: learn, work, retire. And that's no longer relevant in our 100-year lives. We will now have 4 quarters instead of those 3. And so if you're listening to this, my invitation is, rather than doing what most Americans today think of as being a successful way of aging, which is just to keep doing and looking what you're doing for as long as you can until you can't, my invitation is, oh my God, life is so much longer than you think. So you can have actually multiple lives and careers, but you might want to think about them a little bit ahead. So I think your at your age is actually the perfect time. You still have a few years of kids and the current career, but you can just begin to see that in a plannable cycle, you may be able to start dreaming about doing something entirely new. I'm in one of these programs in universities that I think will spread, which are very specifically geared at midlife transitions, to invite people as they enter their 50s, to start thinking about the next chapter post some of the great things they've done that they may not want to do for another 30 or 40 years. So if you don't want to keep doing what you're doing, and I was, very successful in my first career, but, mastery can often lead to boredom. One pillar of burnout that people don't talk about very much is just boredom, doing the same thing, repeating the same thing year in, year out, no matter how brilliant and wonderful and even how needed or welcomed it is, still boring to the person who has to emit it for decades.
So why don't we pivot back to the article, because what I would like for you to walk us through are these 4 things that you wish you would have known back then about when it came to being in the thick of things during your working years and your parenting years as well.
Then you're going to have to remind me what they are, because I wrote the article a few years back.
It's fine. I've got the article right in front of me. So I wanted my audience to really know these, because they like I mentioned earlier, they really resonated with me. So the first thing you listed was, don't sweat the small stuff. One bad week doesn't make you a bad parent. When they grow up, your kids probably won't even remember it.
Yeah, they'll remember something else. I mean, it's memory is such a hilarious thing. So your kids always resent and harbor some terrible thing you did, which didn't even mark you. And the ones that you are guilty about, often they forget. I had that happen several times with my kids. So yes, I think most parents beat themselves over them today, where parenting is becoming such a competitive sport. I think
Literally.
we're benchmarking and beating ourselves over. And I think the bottom line on all that is, kids don't really react to what you do. They really react to who you are. And so, you want them to read. They're never going to read if you don't have books all around the house and you're not reading, and everything else. So I think that's just a bit of a relax. It's become such a crazy competitive game, what kind of progeny you're raising. And I think you don't have to quite measure every fight and every failing along the way. Teach kids that you fail well and then you recover. That's the secret of resilience.
I think that's perfectly stated. Your second point was, don't burn out being a perfectionist parent. Instead, invest sustainably and regularly in yourself and your kids.
Yes. So, I think burnout everywhere right now is at crisis point. I mean, we've got mental health issues among kids and parents. And I think that comes from the slightly irreconcilable pressures of trying to juggle work and family. And so in most of my coaching, I tell people just 80% everything. Don't be so 150%, neither on work nor on parenting, right? Go gentler in the second quarter from 25 to 50, where there's just too much to do. It is impossible. They do this to you in school. I remember when I went and did an MBA, right? They give you too much to do. And the sign of leadership is being able to prioritize carefully and mindfully and eliminate a lot of things and not feel bad about that. And so the invitation is to consciously choose what you really care about, what you really prioritize, including, quality time with your kids, but also quality time with yourself, so you can cope with your charming children when they become difficult. And that requires time to yourself, right? Which a lot of, particularly mothers, I'm gonna hit out at mothers on this a bit. I think the perfectionism is slightly gendered because society is so tough on women, right? And we have to look perfect, be perfect, cook perfect, mother perfect. Enough! Just dump perfectionism across the board.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you because I feel like I don't think she'll mind if I say this. I have a front row seat with Teresa that with what you just said, I can see that with her. And I wish she would take more time for herself to think about, what it is that she wants to do. Not only today, but in the future as well. Your third point is love them a lot, but keep your ambition focused on your own career, not theirs.
Yes, well, there's a quote from, I think it was Jung, that, the worst thing a parent can do is project their unachieved dreams onto their children. And we know this. Everybody knows this. There are a million movies that chart just how terrible that is for children. And so I think I agree with Eric Fromm, a psychologist, who says, again, a mother in particular's most important role in parenting is to be happy. And if you can nourish that idea, is role modeling that you can be happy in a crazy world, you can find some kind of inner peace and serenity, so that your children can believe that it exists rather than hoping that your children. I hear this all the time. Our kids are going to save the planet. No, I'm sorry. We better get going on saving the planet, all of us together, but our generation in particular, and not count on the kids to be doing what maybe we should be doing. And that's just the same on careers. It's the same on anything. If you're hoping to achieve your dreams through them, they just become a means to your own agenda, not a healthy thing for either generation.
Good point. So your last point here was, if you are married, and I think of the four, I think this is the really one that I want to stress the most. And we're going to follow up with some other questions on this. But you wrote, if you are married, love your spouse and don't demote your relationship to the bottom of the priority pile. No one will thank you. Your kids are learning relationship skills from you. Inspire them.
Well, yeah.
I don't know if you could have wrote that any better.
Kids don't do what you say, they look at what you are. And so one of the most impactful things that your children learn, of course, is the relationships between whoever's parenting, whether you're alone or, at least I grew up with a single mom. So I learned all of my leadership lessons from her. But if I had, and for people who have couples who are raising them, they will be extraordinarily attuned to the quality of your relationship, and it's worth investing in. I raised my children in France and was always deeply impressed by the hierarchy in a lot of French couples, that the couple always came first. I'd never seen anything like it. The American
certainly
culture,
not here in the States.
No, the American culture is kids first, and it does them no favors. I really found that makes kids less happy than watching parents who take priority, go out once a week at least on a date night, have time, and even in terms of conversation at a dinner table, that they are interested in each other's thoughts and model good conversations, good listening, good feedback, and mutual support, which then the kids learn is all about what relations are for. And so, yeah, don't give your kids the last word, the first word, the middle word. Don't make them kings of their little castles. It is one of the greatest disservices we do our children. So yeah, priorities at home reflect a lot.
I agree. So I think that's actually a really good transition into one of the other hidden gems of your work is this TED Talk that you gave, and we'll be sure to link to this in our show notes, titled Conscious Coupling, Managing Dual Careers. And in it, you made a couple notes, one of which you've already referenced, I think we'll keep coming back to, is this be sure that you're playing the long game. Again, it goes back to, I think we don't think we're going to live as long as we probably will. But the other point that you mentioned, and one that I worry about often, and especially dealing with the families I work with who are between the ages of 50 and 60, is that we have been seeing surging divorce rates with that age group. And so if there was a couple points that you could pull out of that TED Talk for us, if you could reference those and then talk about this divorce rate circumstance with people in their 50s and 60s. And I know you've written a book on that as well that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, so I personally left a 22-year marriage when I turned 50. I'm pretty well because I was turning 50, and I think many people wake up just as we're discussing, right, at the end of a very dense second quarter, 25 to 50, where you're doing a lot of things under a lot of pressure. And at the end of that, you reap, I think, some of what you've sown, right? So have you invested in your couple? Have you ignored the big shift I'm pointing to in a lot of my work is that the role of women in a lot of couples has shifted, right? So the expectation of our parents' generation, where there was usually one lead career and one follower career, has shifted as women have become more educated, more employed, more powerful, and higher earning, that now 83% of couples in the US are dual career couples, which means they both work. And so then the added pressure of Q2 is whose career comes first, which creates tensions, competitions, resentments of all kinds, coping mechanisms. And some couples manage to work through those collegially and find some way of balancing, taking turns, negotiating. Those are the ones that stay together. The ones that I think you see coming to you in their 50s and 60s are those where they weren't happy with the way that negotiation came out. And typically, on the whole, your listeners will also know, mostly it's women walking out the door, right? 2/3 of marriages, of divorces, which, by the way, divorces have been dropping for 30 years among the educated, right? But this last problem is how people negotiate the empty nest post-first career years, and whether the women, I'll summarize it rather in a gendered way, so I know I'm going to irritate some of your listeners, but I'll say it anyways, is mostly what, on the whole, right now where we are in history, come 50, women have a sense of, it's my turn. And the negotiation begins with, are you, partner of mine, ready to support me, applaud me, even perhaps, maybe, to the slight cost to your own career plans or visibility, and how those two forces work out and whether you get to finally take turns. I'm sure you've seen this in your own couple, Paul. You probably, for many, the women take the care precedence in Q2, and then they want to fly and flourish and become in Q3. The men, more typically, because of the way we've all been socialized, have more of the bread earning weight on their shoulders in majority terms. And then it's a question of, can they then shift from that role?
Can they pivot?
Or are they attached to it? And can they even cede some of the limelight and the status and the identity to a potentially very successful spouse? And those are some of the tensions that, if you can't, lead often to a separation of ways.
So the book that you wrote, Late Love, Mating and Maturity, did I get that right? Talk to us a little bit about what, if we're reading that, what would be a couple of key takeaways that somebody reading that needs to walk away with?
I think think it's, again, a little politically incorrectly, it's an aspirational invitation to people to imagine that transitioning in your personal life is not necessarily a terrible thing. I think divorce is cast in all kinds of terrible, awful, judgmental ways. I think it's time to realize, again, if we're going to live to be towards 100-year lives, and we're basically ready to accept that we'll have 3, 4, 5 careers, the idea that we might, and still be a good person, skilled in relationships, have 2 couples, maybe even 3, is something that's still a little bit under discussion, right? And so this book was just an invitation to say, yeah, you know what? You can make a mature, informed decision as you head into midlife, whether or not this relationship is serving both parties well. And if not, how do you design a loving exit where you can both recreate new roles in constructive ways? And so that the book charts the 4 phases of what that requires. Leaving, looking, loving, and leaping are the 4 phases of almost any transition, but certainly of a love transition that people might want to embark on or consider. And I recommend it to be read by men and women at your age, because really what you want to do is be able to avoid the leaving decision by better understanding what the balance should be as you close down this first half.
I have to smile and laugh, because one of my favorite conversations that I had I think earlier this year, was with a gentleman by the name of Jim Sexton, and he is still a prominent New York divorce attorney, and he wrote the book, and it's behind me. And it says How to Stay in Love, a divorce attorney's guide to keeping marriages together, and out of my office. And Jim was great. And you two would probably share a lot of same commonalities. He was divorced too. He learned from not only going through this with his clients, but through his own personal divorce as well. But I think you raised some really good points, and that book will be back on the shelf behind me soon. So
I think couples, we talk a lot about men and women and their changing roles and all this kind of thing. A lot of that conversation has been about work, like how, and I think we need to update our thinking about the shift in gender roles and earning power and employability impacts couples at home in a way that needs to be reevaluated in modern 21st century terms. Women simply have more power. They have more power at work. They have more financial independence, which gives them more power at home, which some people like and some people really don't like. And if you're struggling with that reality, it tends to color your couple conversations.
So I think one of the last topics that we talked about or touched on, and I think I already mentioned this, it's been an interesting focal point of this show for the last 2 years has been life transitions. And you wrote a Harvard Business article on that titled "Learn to Get Better at Transitions," and I'll link to the article in our show notes. But in that you talk about there's four skills to being a competent transitioner, if you will. So you talk about pacing and planning, leaving gracefully, letting the inside out, and finally letting the outside in. From a transition standpoint, Avivah, what would you tell our audience to be on the lookout for? And of those, what 1 or 2 points would you emphasize that can help people be better in transitions, no matter what it is, whether it's a divorce, children going to college, losing a career, whatever it may be? I think that's the one thing, is that life transitions happen to us way more often than we think about.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the biggest point, is to normalize transition. I think so often, we still talk about the midlife crisis, the quarter life crisis, the later life crisis. These are not crises. They are very predictable. You are about, when your kids leave, everybody, you can map it out,
right. You know what's going to happen.
And there are 20 books about empty nest transitions. And so I think the idea of knowing that they're going to come along, being kind of prepared to at least discuss the consequences of them, and realizing that you're going to have very regular transitions, both in your professional life and in your personal life. And sometimes they happen at the same time, which can be particularly problematic. And transition, so there are two aspects of transition I just like to remind you. One, there's change. So change usually happens to you, right? There are events in life. Somebody dies, you lose a partner, you get divorced, there's a lot of loss, something you didn't choose or control. The other kind of change is the kind of change you make happen yourself. The impact of change is very different in those two cases, right? Whether you're controlling it or suffering from it. But transition is your inner adaptation to the new reality. And how long does it take you to adapt? And I just like to invite people that transitions are work, and there are skills that you can build to ease them a little bit more. One of which is, preparedness, planning, get ready for the transitions that you can predict, and also be aware that there will probably be some that you can't predict, and have some ideas of what your plans might want to be, having good social networks, and having a good body of understanding of the strengths and competences that you've built over the last decades, so that where you might want to be able to transfer them, if you suddenly lose your job. I mean, look, we're watching the tech industry let go of tens of thousands of people who probably weren't expecting this particular transition. That's going to be tough. And they're going to want to build their resilience to doing that. And so the look inside, look outside pieces are the first place in transition is to go inside. It's to figure out, okay, that chapter just ended. Can I leave well? Can I shut it down well? Can I not burn the place up or be deeply angry and resentful for the next decade? Can I come to peace with the end? And then what do I want next? And not to automatically, which some people I'm sure who are leaving the tech world, rush into the next thing that's as close to the last thing as you possibly can find, but to invite an opening, an exploration of who am I now, because it's probably a different person than who you were when you entered into that phase. So look inside first. And then the invitation is look outside, go explore. The answer may be completely invisible to you in some new place or project that you've never heard of, never been to. And so the ability to widen your net and go and put your toe into a bunch of new things, as an explorer might, with a curious mind, and a kind of growth mindset that we talk a lot about nowadays, is really essential to successful, relatively serene transitions.
I think the ability to come back to one of the points you've made multiple times now during our conversation is, if you realize really how long life is, it can make those transitions easier and not as overwhelming. And that's easier said than done in the moment, like with any transition. But I know going through one myself about 7 years ago, when I went from corporate world to full-time into, my family office, financial planning firm, TAMA, the sooner I was able to let that old place go and look forward, the whole looking in and then look out, the better, I wouldn't say easier, but the better that transition was.
Yeah, leaving. There's a great book by Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot called Exits. Leaving is no joke. Leaving anything is no joke. It's a certain kind of loss. It's a certain kind of grieving. It's a certain kind of letting go. And it may, for some people, take a bit of time. It may take quite a long time. And so giving yourself that space and time, I actually think your number of 7 years is significant, because I think, and I usually work with my coaching clients on this, I think we go through some form of transition every 7 years. All of your cells are actually new every 7 years. You are actually a new human being every 7 years.
I don't know where I literally, Avivah, just read that within the last week or two. Like, we're basically like, you talk about being a different person, like, and literally like every 7 years you are, because your cells are replaced. So it's fascinating. Well, this has been an incredible conversation, which I was looking forward to it, and it's been incredible. And so I want to come back to my closing question that I ask all of my guests, at least those who are parents, which is the majority, which is, what is the best thing about being a parent?
Homeschooling. But I'll say that in a slightly different way. I never homeschooled my children. They schooled me. I think children are the greatest educational gift in life. They teach you pretty well everything you need to know about yourself, about life, and about the world to come. And if you're open to listening and being a good student, you are likely to discover multitudes.
Well, Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, I think that's the ultimate place to wrap up our conversation. Let me ask for, and we'll have lots of this in the show notes, links to articles that we've covered, your book, the TED Talk. But if people want to find more about you and your work, what's the best place for them to go to?
I have a website where for all of my work, which is 20-first.com. You'll find my books all over Amazon. I've done several, and you won't find my personal website because I'm just refurbishing it, but I promise that by January next year, AvivahWittenberg-Cox.com will be back online in new, splendiferous third quarter colors.
Well, awesome. I'll be sure to make sure that that's in the show notes as well. But Avivah, I can't thank you enough. I'll say for this first conversation, because I'm sure that there's going to be a few more in our future for sure.
With pleasure. All my favorite topics right here in a nutshell. Nice talking to you, Paul.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast. Please visit tamacapital.com to subscribe to this podcast, or to connect with certified financial planner and registered investment advisor Paul Fenner of Tama Capital. And please join us again next time on the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.